Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is going to focus on the landscape, a review of the sports landscape in Rwanda. We're going to look at issues to do with governance in terms of bodies that governs various sports disciplines. We're also going to look at infrastructure, and really we're going to look at solutions and discuss strategies on how we can ensure a dynamic and very competitive sports industry in Rwanda, not only locally but regionally and internationally. And that said, we're honored to have on our show tonight Félicité Rwanda, who is the acting president of the Rwanda National Olympic and Sports Committee, and she's also a member of the International Olympic Committee. Félicité, great to have you on The Square tonight.
Thank you, Diana. Happy to be with you this evening.
You're welcome. Great to have you on the show. My name is Diana PC, host of The Square. As always, I'm joined by The Square resident panelists, and I'll start with Bernadette on my left. Great to have you on the show as always.
Thank you, Diana.
Looking
First time you've called me Bernadette.
Bernadette, looking good in Uzi.
Thank you.
Also resident panelist on the show, Charles Herber. Great to have you as always on the show.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
Good. Good. Before we always kick off our conversations, we focus on a couple of midweek highlights from the Square resident panelists that I'd like to share with the guests and also the general public and our viewers. I don't know if there are midweek highlights, Brenna, you'd like to kick off with?
Of course, there's the MTN listing. Like I said, I wish MTN had opted for an IPO, not instead of listing by introduction. But that's a whole different discussion. There's a lot that has been happening, actually. We also saw them enter into launch fintech, which is interesting for the market. It will be interesting to see how that evolves with the banking sector. If you look at MTN with its mobile money base, so how that disrupts the financial sector will be interesting. On a lighter note, the bill gets the
most expensive divorce, I think. That's what a lot of people are saying.
Yes, and I think the learning from it is perhaps for some of us who are not yet married, I think everything we've been told about money and marriage doesn't make sense. It's not true.
I will agree with you on that point. Charles, any midweek highlights you'd like to share?
Yeah, of course, ever since COVID started, the highlights are usually around COVID. But last week we hinted around policing COVID and easing restrictions. And at a time when the country has gone into a mode of vaccines, a mode of allowing events to take place. Now we're seeing Tour du Rwanda, a little bit connected to the show we are having today, and people lining up on the streets in numbers, and that's not, sort of being checked, or if it is okay, I'm not too sure. We have a Visit Rwanda Tembero Rwanda program. I was a little bit disappointed that over the weekend there were some young people who were arrested somewhere in Gisenyi. Were they violating COVID regulations? Most likely, yes. Can that be checked through different ways? Because I was doing some work in Musanze on Friday and came back to Kigali on Saturday, but where I was, were required to do COVID tests, and but we were socializing. So if the COVID tests are done, why not allow people to socialize? And I think this is the point we were raising last week around a smart way of allowing business to continue as usual. Yeah.
There's some hope, Cabinet. We're waiting for the yellow paper.
Everyone is waiting for the yellow papers tonight with a lot of...
I don't think anything will change.
You don't think anything will change?
Really?
Anyway, we'll see. Past midnight, I'm sure there'll be some updates. So thank you very much, Félicité, for joining the show tonight as we look at a review of the sports landscape in Rwanda. And the first part of the topic that I'd like us to focus on is to do with infrastructure and sports strategy. So over the last 2 decades, there have been hefty investments by government and partners in developing the sports sector. If you'll allow me to read, give some examples for viewers in Rwanda and out of Rwanda. Some examples include the Kigali Arena. It's over 10,000 seating capacity. We have the Gahanga Cricket Stadium. Charles, I know you're a big cricket fan. You've been involved in the growth of cricket in Rwanda. We have the Gisagara International Gymnasium, and as well as various football stadiums in different parts of the country. In addition to that, Rwanda is really working hard to, make itself a sports tourism hub. There are key activities happening this year. Just to kick off, we know that we have the inaugural season of the Basketball African League this month. We have, of course, the ongoing Tour de Rwanda. We also have FIBA Afrobasket that will take place in August this year. And we have the Paris Saint-Germain Football Academy that is more or less being finalized. So in spite of these inroads, Felicite, that I've mentioned, we still have major gaps when it comes to issues such as sports strategy, talent detection, as well as regional competitiveness. It's been said that arguably Rwanda athletics is arguably the least performing in the region. So my question to you, before we also hear from the panel, is in spite of all this, why do you think there are these gaps? And from your perspective, as your experience in the sports sector, what do you think can be done to address these gaps?
Thank you, Diana. You have mentioned a lot of good things happening in the sports movement. First of all, we have to congratulate our leadership, because all that is just because Rwanda works, and people need to see what's going on after the darkest years that we went through. So this is something that really speaks to the world. As Rwanda, you know very well, we don't have diamond, we don't have gold, but at least we have good leadership. That's why we are reaching all these steps, and especially in sports movement, whereby the leadership is into sport. That's why all these things are happening. Yeah, it's unfortunate that all those things are put in place, and yes, there are some gaps. First of all, about the detection of talents. For me, I believe it's a very big gap and need to be considered as a priority. I do believe that in every school there is a school teacher that is supposed to be leading sports activities in schools, and also in the sector and district level, there are those ones responsible for sports. But at the end of it all, I wonder what is being done, because it needs at least to have some initiatives of organizing like tournaments, which is not very expensive, whereby these players will not need like transport, will not need so many things. They organize tournaments maybe per class, whereby they want to do some detection. And if these teachers or these people, administrators of sports in the district and sector level, if they don't have that capacity, I think it would be better to coordinate with the federation that has that sport in particular at hand, so that they may send in their technicians to come and do the detection. I think that the collaboration is something that is missing in that. And yet I do believe that Rwandans have the capacity also to reach the World Cup, because at least one time it happened. So we need to see the continuity. That's where it is failing. We need to look at the continuity and always think of starting from the grassroots level. We have different organizations like Ijabo Ryacu Rwanda. It has these young sports girls and men. They need to cooperate so that at least we may see something that is tangible. Another thing is that there is always this thing of saying that we don't invest in these young people. We need to call in at least the private sector to come and support these activities. It is very expensive, and it needs at least some support. So I think they need to come in and also support these activities, so that in the long run we have good athletes that should do something better in sports. Yeah, for the competitions, it's not a surprise that we don't gain these medals, we don't win, because we have to invest in these players. For example, I think last week I was in a meeting on the regional level, and I would hear other presidents of the National Olympic Committees mentioning that the athletes are now in London for 9 months preparing for the Olympic Games. So you can imagine that athlete has gone to London for 9 months preparing for the Olympic Games, and here comes to compete with the Rwandan athlete who has not had that expertise, that chance to reach that way. So how do you expect that the result would come out? Yeah, so there is a lot to be done in that in that context so that we may have at least the results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felicite. We're definitely going to touch back on some of the key points you mentioned. I absolutely agree with you, especially when you talk about the element of investing in athletes as well as coaches. I think that's something that's lacking. I was reading today earlier on ahead of the show, the coaches who have been suspended, in the last couple of months, and it's quite alarming. That's an issue that we need to focus on. But before we get to the next part of the conversation, that's to do with governance. That's a key aspect of why these issues remain. I'd like to hear from the panelists. Bernard, do you want me to kick off with you based on the opinions you have on this?
Yeah, I think this year, if I'm not mistaken, I think in January is when Cabinet approved the new sports policy, which is till 2030. And it's quite innovative, and I think it's a revised policy.
From the 2012
yes.
Sports policy.
Yes.
Yes.
And so when you look at that policy on paper, you wonder whether this discussion can make any contribution, because they've done the homework, they've looked at the problems, and so the plan looks good on paper, but I think we still have gaps in terms of implementation, and especially regarding talent development, because on one hand, if we're saying we are going to encourage schools to introduce more sports activities, and then that space for sports is now occupied by classrooms, that is difficult. Then you also have the issue around the timetable, the school curriculum. Mm-hmm. For most teachers, sports is seen as leisure. It's something that should, they allocated time either weekend, and they don't see it as, that's something that should be routine. And if you ask me, I think it should be done every day and not reserved for Saturday and Sunday. So that mismatch, I think, will in the end undermine whatever plans you have in terms of achieving the objectives of the sports policy. I think for tourism, of course, sports tourism will easily take off, as we can see, because the infrastructure is already in place. But I think what you want and what is sustainable is building that pool of natives that can actually compete and also be known as a sports country, as a sporting nation. So until we fix the grassroots issues around the infrastructure in even rural areas especially, because we know that if you look at most neighborhoods, there are no playgrounds, so that is an issue. So until we begin to nurture children that appreciate sports as part of a quality life, and it's a culture. Someone wakes up in the morning and they have to maybe run an hour, or in the evening do 30 minutes. Until we make that a culture, I think it will be very difficult for us to achieve the strategic objectives around the sports policy.
Which is, it's actually interesting that this revised sports policy focuses a lot on decentralization. So, they're looking at neighborhoods, and trying to really search for talent from, the grassroots level that you're mentioning, Bernard. Charles?
I think I'm only young in as far as being younger than the two of you combined, Ben and Diana, but I'm a veteran in sports administration, so I sort of have bragging rights ahead of the two of you when it comes to some of these issues. I want to talk about competition on two different fronts, and the first one, ladies, is I like the point Madame Felicite mentioned around preparation and competition, and how the two really go hand in hand. It varies from your childhood development programs. So it doesn't matter that you're going to do all these talent detection programs when you don't have a very competitive inter-schools competition, if any at all. It's of no use at all to have all these sporting facilities required at Mudugudu level, at Kagari level, and what have you, and you put them in your Mihigo, when, for example, you don't have inter-Mudugudu sporting competitions. So the level of competition has to match with the level of our policies, and sometimes I feel that is a very big gap, especially at our schools level. We do have in Rwanda we have a very strong sports federation called the Sports Federation de Sport Scolaire. It is doing what it is supposed to do, but can it do better? Definitely it can do better, because we do not see a very clear pathway of kids who go through the school's competition to the club's competition towards the national teams. You almost see individual talent expressing itself, being snatched by the clubs, and then going on to play national or international. The other thing also in terms of competition is at an administrative level. It sometimes is painful. For example, I'm a little bit disappointed that Madame Felicite is not running for president of the National Olympic Committee. I saw a list of people who are running for the executive that has sneaked around, and all the top executives are running unopposed. So the leading sports body in this country has all the top executives who are all unopposed. And then you wonder, okay, if at that level we have stifled competition, then imagine how else it's going to be in the respective structures that the body runs. So I believe there's still a lot of work to do in as far as competition is concerned. It needs to come from a policy level to schools, inter-class competitions within the schools, across the different sports disciplines, and you know, it then funnels up all the way up. Yeah.
And I know in the revised sports policy that it was stated that inter-school competitions are going to be made mandatory.
Yes.
So
that will be.
It gives hope, looking at the future.
And also, what the competitions do is facilitate private investment in these tournaments.
And private sector engagement.
Yes. Because if you don't have them, then that means we have to wait for the national championship. So that in itself limits private investment.
Madame Felicite, before we go to the next part of the discussion, would you like to weigh in on what Charles and Brenna have said?
Yeah.
Over to you. Would you like to comment on what Charles and Brenna have said?
I think we all believe the same.
Yes.
And if Charles can comment, he has a lot of experience in sports administration. So I feel comfortable when I see him there. He knows. And we do believe the same. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next part that I really want us to focus on is to do with governance. It's been said that the issues with governance are actually structural. And some of the issues that have been facing different sports federations or bodies over the years have really made an impact on the sports disciplines themselves, we saw just to give a few examples, just last month in April, we saw 2 resignations from presidents of 2 bodies ahead of their premature resignations, if I may say, citing personal reasons. This was the Football Federation as well as the National Olympic Committee. We all know, since at least starting from 2019, there have been allegations to the cycling body FERWASI of abuse, sexual abuse, of corruption, of fraud, of resource mismanagement, amongst other things. So my question to you, Felicite, you've been in this sector, you've been in this field for, I'm very sure over the last 2 decades. How can sports bodies work together to solve these governing issues that impact the overall sport and competitiveness across the country, and how Rwanda presents itself to the world when it comes to this industry?
Yeah, thank you, Dana. Actually, it is a disappointing moment when you see leaders who have the mandate organizing sport bodies and who have the experience and just are resigning from day to day. It's already a bad reputation for the sport movement. Yeah, but I think, I may not know the reasons why they are resigning, but I think we are just lacking a structure and we are lacking framework of which we should work in. I do believe if we had a framework and we know how we should go about certain things, we believe that maybe we get memorandum of understanding with the different sport entities, and then we know where we can go and where we cannot go. So I think that's something that's lacking in our governance. And another thing is that put in place just weakness of someone. Let's every leader, every person has a weakness somewhere, somehow. Now people need to be focused and at least see if someone is weak in this way, but he has some strength in another way. People should not, keep on, just mentioning the weak part of leaders. So unless we come to this oneness together, unless we are focused, we cannot reach far. So I think we need just that framework, and we just go by laws. They say you have violated this law, so these things should not happen. So, and then another thing, we need accountability. If you are a president, you go there and say, in the 4 years, I will do ABC. And then there's a General Assembly every year. You need to report to the General Assembly. This is what I said, and this is what is happening. And then the General Assembly must follow and see what you said, what you have done, and where there is a gap. And people try to work together to find that gap. We need to hold hands together so that we may fill that gap for the betterment of our sport. But that's something that is lacking. Yeah.
And Felicity, why do you think it's lacking? Why? Rwanda is a country when it comes to leadership and accountability in different sectors. This is not usually a big issue. We're always challenging our leaders. We're always challenging ourselves. Why is it in sports, we keep on making the same mistakes, should I say, expecting different results? Is it the mentality? Is it the mindset? Is it that we don't prioritize it? Why do these governance issues keep on happening?
I think it's just a matter of mindset and not following the bylaws, because every, at least federation or the Comité Olympique, we have the bylaws that we are governed by the International Olympic Committee, which we need to follow. So I think we need to go deep to that so that we may reach our goal. Otherwise, things will always keep coming. And at least if one has become a candidate and has been elected, people must have a full trust. And let him continue and then see how far things are going. You are elected just for 4 years. Then on the third year, when the fourth year is coming, bombs are starting coming out. They start coming out, hey, you did this, you did this. And then you feel at the end of it all, one is tired of being talked about because children are listening, everyone is listening about what's being talked about. Then you decide just to leave. And there we are losing. Because once you are in the fourth year, you are making connections. You are making networks outside. By the time you get used to the system, you are gone. Another new one comes. So you find that there's no continuity. But if you had structure in place, even if one resigned, see, the institution would continue. So we are just lacking a proper structure, proper governing body, transparency, and accountability.
Thank you very much, Felicity. Charles, I'd like to throw this to you. I know you were part of the governing Rwanda Cricket Association, part of that body, especially, when cricket was being introduced to this Rwanda. So you have experience on the challenges of governance. So happy to hear your thoughts on this.
Do not belittle that, because I also served on the Olympic Committee executive for several years. So I think the governance of our sports fraternity, generally speaking, is a total mess. But it's very easy to drop this buzzword governance and you think it's that simple. But if you break it down to very, very simple things, for instance, Madame Felicite mentions about the role of the General Assembly and the executive, especially the president and usually there are about 3 or 4 or 5 people, depending on the organization. You really find that the powers that are vested from the executive, there is no structure under which they are checked. But you can even take it a notch higher and say the president of any sports body in this country can very easily overrule decisions that are made by the rest of the body, including his own executive. And why is this? There's 2 or 3 reasons. The biggest by far is that all these are elected officers who are volunteers, and therefore the natural feeling is that because I am giving you my free time, you don't have a reason to question me. Because you are not paying me, and I am spending my own time and my own money to serve the game, therefore I deserve whatever I deserve to make my point, and
my decisions
my decisions are not supposed to be challenged.
Yeah.
And that has happened quite a lot. And sometimes it is justifiably so if you listen to the side of the head of that particular sports body. But then also, on the other hand, you have a situation where people's survival is the sports body. They don't have any other job. They stop whatever they are doing and come to run the affairs of that sports organization or to be involved in the day-to-day sports organization. Yet they are volunteers. So you will find that this guy will say, okay, who are you to question me? Yet you are out there running on your own business, and I'm the only one who is sacrificing all my time in this. The other challenge that we have is that deliberately, and with no offense meant, Madame Felicite, even the biggest sports governing body that we have in our country, they have deliberately not empowered the organization, and that's in terms of the secretariat, so the people who run the sports body in the day-to-day affairs. So I'll drop you a question easily. Do we know of a CEO of any body in the sports fraternity? The answer is no, but we know all the presidents. Why? Because the presidents will make sure that the CEO will be as clerical as possible, so that they are the ones to shine.
Not visible.
Yes. Yet ideally, and back to the buzzword governance, if I asked you, do you know the chairmen or chairpersons of our insurance companies and our banks and what have you? No, but we know all the CEOs. So until we get to that point where we run our sports organizations as businesses.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I like to give examples of our government. Our government has invested so much money and time and effort in streamlining our governance processes. You'll have a high turnover of ministers and, at the top echelon. But the guys who actually do the work are the most important. And the government has realized that. Government is very good at doing its business. They have realized that actually the head can change, but it's very important that the systems, that the body, that the day-to-day operations are as intact as possible. And that's why you'll see PSs, very good director generals, very good technicians running the show. And until we get to that point where we understand that we need these checks and balances, we will not take any strides. I was very impressed, I think, it was last year, either early last year or late 2019, I did see the Rwanda Governance Board come in to step in to address the issue that Rayon Sport was having, and yet that's a club. So shouldn't it be time that they came in to look at addressing the entire sports administration, even from the ministry level and National Olympic Committee and the other federations? I think absolutely yes.
Parna?
I think after Charles, as someone, it's difficult, but I'll just, from a layman's point of view, I mean, if you look at the confusion, it's difficult to know. Like he said, I mean, who is who? You just hear a few names, the head, the presidents, and that's it. And it's like, It's a family business. Huh? So I think there has to be a shift and there has to be a change. One, to bring accountability, and there has to be transparency. In absence of that, I think these policies will remain good on paper and will continue to maybe bring in some income around sports tourism, but not do much in terms of national development. So I feel that until we have passionate people running these sports organizations, will not get it right. And the reference here is, if you have someone who feels they are doing you a favor, I mean, we know even in real life, ordinary life, if someone feels they're doing you a favor by, giving you a service, then it will always be a problem. That is how they wake up in the morning and say, I don't want this job. No matter what is at stake, they will say, I want to leave, and that's it. So that has to change. You must want the job and actually do it well, and if when you don't do it well, you should be held to account. So I don't know if Rwanda Governance Board has the capabilities of overhauling the whole system. It's not an easy one, because as we've seen, when you try to initiate change, most of the time you get a lot of backlash, pushback, which is sometimes misplaced. But the other problem, sometimes I feel it's the politics. Again, getting involved in sports. So people are not in it to actually drive the sports agenda, but to do politics. So when you have that, then it's impossible to have professional bodies that are focused on growing the sport. But let us not forget, it's a global problem. If you look at the sports federations, I think very few are actually functional. We know football, the corruption, the scandals. So it's Rwanda is not isolated, but I think we can do better if we mean to. Yeah.
Okay. Before we go to the next question, Madame Felicite, is there something you'd like to share based on what the resident panelists have shared?
Yeah, I totally agree with Mr. Charles, saying that at least we need capacity building for our executives so that we may learn how to put structure in place, and then we move by laws. That's very important. Another important point is that Brenda said one needs to be passionate. Just to be passionate about sports. Don't look for any other, profit gain, but just be passionate. When you are passionate, everything is cool, and you listen to everyone, so that you may take up a decision. So we need to move to that, and then the sports movement will move on. But then, saying that it's global, we need to make a difference. Since Rwanda has made a difference in other institutions, why not sports? What can we do at least to make that difference, and we become, role models in sports, so that with Rwanda, leadership is on another level in everything, including sports. So we need to think about that, and then we move on. We need people to help, because other institutions are okay, other institutions are doing fine, but sports is still a problem. So we need now at least the government to focus in sports, and then make a difference, because sports is something very important. Sports is a universal language, and sport can transform the world, and also people's mindset are being transformed. People think clearly. So we need to do something for sports. It's really sad that this is happening, and yet the leadership is really into sport. They have done everything possible, but we are just, I don't know. We still have a long way to go.
Thank you.
Something about
but can you just make it brief?
Yes. It will be very brief, and it's about the role of everybody, and especially if you ask, if I shoot it out there and say, who's in charge of sports administration or sports generally in this country? And I'll pick a sector like tourism or media, for example, or transport. Or transport, because If you go to transport, there is a Ministry of Infrastructure that does the policy and what have you. And then you'll have the RURA that will be the regulator and so on and so forth. And then you'll have the federation and or Asetamorwa that manages the guys of the motorbikes, and then you'll have their own association. There's a lot of auto-regulation in that space. You'll go to tourism. Tourism, you'll have Ministry of Trade or you'll have RDB at the policy level. And then you have the chambers. And then you have the different associations that then drive their own agenda and the tour operators. In sports, you have the Ministry of Sports that does its policy. Then they'll wake up in the morning and buy kit. The same ministry will appoint a football coach. The same ministry will go and supervise construction of a new stadium. And then the same ministry will tell leaders of sports organizations to give way and others come in. And then you ask yourself, who is, yes,
you can't
exactly.
be policy and implementer.
Yes, yes. And I know for a fact that the thinking behind that intermediary organ was supposed to be the National Olympic and Sports Committee. But just by its acronym or its appellation, it is inclined towards Olympic sports. Yeah, and because the majority of their funding really comes from the Olympic movement and the solidarity movement, and naturally that's how it will be. But you have a huge gap in terms of regulation and overseeing of
this industry.
Yes.
Let's just read a couple of tweets that are coming in from our viewers. We can have them on our screen. The first tweet comes from Fred, and Fred states that the sports landscape in Rwanda is nowadays characterized by resignations. Could it be COVID-19 effect or something else not known yet? I don't know if Fred is being sarcastic about COVID, but yeah, these are the resignations we were just talking about. And then we have another tweet coming in saying,
yeah, but it's true.
Is this accountability, interference in discipline, or what? It is sad anyway, a total mess. And they're talking about the resignations. Just hold your thought right now as I just quickly keep on reading what our viewers are sharing with us online. We have another tweet coming in that says, the Ministry of Sports cannot be policymaker and implementer at the same time. Federations and sport associations should be responsible for the implementation. But unfortunately, this is not the case here. Next tweet, please. And of course, Charles, this person echoes what you were just saying right now. Our next tweet comes in, and this tweet states, I agree with Charles Hubbard that we need to consider our sports space as a key development component, an all-rounder for the nation. Nothing will come out of it unless, this is done. So Julian is saying we really need to be more deliberate and prioritize sports than is currently being done. We have also another tweet coming in from Julian, and she says, also the sports space, especially around the sports, should hold schools, federations, and everyone administering in sports accountable in terms of level of engagement. How do we have schools around the country not involved in any sport and competitively? It's really tragic to know that, inter-school competitions in terms of sports have not really been entrenched in how we do things in this country. We also have another tweet, again, coming in from Julian, who says, we need to see sport as an active component of education. We have a couple of tweets coming in, but I just want us to quickly, recap some of the key points that we've been saying.
Can I just comment about that one on curriculum? Because I think I missed the point when Bana brought it up.
Yeah,
so
and
generally
sports,
speaking, yes.
Education syllabus.
Yeah, so generally speaking, sport in schools is looked at as
it's not prioritized.
Extracurricular.
Yes. Extracurricular activity.
Yeah, and in my opinion, it should be co-curricular.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Brenna, you wanted to say something very quickly?
Yes, COVID actually also exposed the sporting
weaknesses.
Yes, because most of them could not maintain the sportsmen and women. Most of them were struggling. We saw that. So yeah, indeed,
it did play a role.
Yeah.
Last question, starting with you, Madame Felicite. Just to recap what we've just been saying in the last 40 or so minutes, what do you think, what can you share with us in terms of key resolutions, in your opinion, on how Rwanda can reverse the trend of low sporting competitiveness and build on the right infrastructure, invest more in training facilities and attracts, better pay scales for athletes and coaches, amongst other things. So in a nutshell, just tell us some, 1 or 2, 3 recommendations moving forward that we really need to do as a country and make and grow a sports industry more deliberately than is being done at the moment?
Thank you, Diana. I think the most important thing is to at least the government help with capacity building of sports administrators, so that we may know how to organize ourselves and the structure just to make a continuation and for sustainability. We need that capacity building from the government, because we are being funded by the International Olympic Committee through Solidarity. It is 100% funding. Yet the project that we do are just like training athletes, coaches, and whatever, but we don't have that budget to at least organize for federations and the National Olympic Committee, so that we may know which is which. Second thing we need to we go by laws, and we need to know our limits. We need to know what the ministry has to do. We need to know what the National Olympic has to do. The National Olympic Committee, as the umbrella of all federations, they have the autonomy of how they must do things. And then they are the people supposed to implement the ministry's policy. So we need to go through the policy together, and then we come out with one agreement. This thing has been done. We have given our comments to the ministry for the policy. So we believe we are going to see what we discuss that will come up. Another thing is that to put much effort in these young school children, because at least we believe that 95% of children go to school. So if they are given that opportunity and they make the sports just as another lesson, not as a by the way, because in school they just spend like 1 hour in sports, so they must look into that. Yeah, and the last but not least, we must include women. Women must also have the same rights. And I do believe if women got the same chances like men get, I think we can make a difference. Let them try women also. Give them that advantage. Give them the chance. So I believe something will change. And now we have maybe hope for this PSG, Pierre Saint-Germain, that is coming over. We do believe that maybe that academy will use its expertise from France, and then we see that maybe something will change. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicite. I'm just, tapping on what you said. It's interesting to see that the technical director was appointed, a woman was appointed for the PSG Academy, and I know you've been very instrumental in pushing forward women to be involved in sports over the last years, and I think that's something, I hope that's something that, will pick up. Closing remarks, I'll start with you, Charles, before I get to Berna. Just recapping 2-3 salient points, what needs to be done to really push forward the sports industry even more?
The government of Rwanda has spent billions on sports infrastructure. If you look at Kigali Arena, $100 million project, look at the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent on the Remera Sports City, the stadium, expanding it and all the infrastructure around. Look at the other stadiums in Huye, in Rubavu, there's a big one at IPRC. Then look at the tennis courts at IPRC as well. Look at the cricket ground in Gahanga. If you look at the investment in infrastructure investment in sports, look at the amount of money the government of Rwanda is spending on Tour du Rwanda. So I think the Auditor General and anyone who cares to ask for value for money needs to pick up a keen interest in sports. To have these billions seated there, and we are not ready to squeeze the juice out of this infrastructure, we're doing President Kagame and his team a big disservice. So I want to echo what Madame Felicite has said about the role of government, and in my opinion it should be predominantly the Rwanda Governance Board should pick up a particular interest. In as long as our sports administration is not streamlined, these magnificent steps, the investments we've made in PSG, the investments we've made in Arsenal, the investments we've made in BAL.
It'll be for nothing.
Yes. Yeah.
I agree. Brenna?
Accountability. Yeah. I think there's need for more accountability, but also a focus on schools. Yeah.
Absolutely. We have 2 last tweets that have just come in that I'd just like us to quickly read before we close. And these tweets are from Ali, who says that sports in schools will only develop if the administrations running these academic institutions offer their support with an open-minded attitude. I believe there's another tweet from the same person, and he also says something to do with the coverage. He says, live coverage of sports events should not be limited to mostly radio coverage. There's a good number of television stations around the country, but none seem to have television rights to cover these events. Very important point.
Yeah, but I think it's
that
more,
is
it's
raising
not
as well.
straightforward.
It's not that straightforward.
Yeah, because it depends on the capacity of those TV stations to be able to provide live coverage.
But it's something we need to start thinking.
Yes. So the rights, I think it's more about the investment in the technical capacity, the production of these events.
But it's interesting that he says that because, in just some literature on this show was that, some experts have said, in other countries, there are lots of seats in stadiums. People don't resort to technology, watching through their phones. And so that culture of going to stadiums, of going to root and support physically is also something that I think we need to, it's a mindset thing, need to engage in even more. Ticket sales, merchandising, that sort of thing around sports is also something we need to factor in. So we've come to the end of the show. Thank you very much to our viewers, for sharing their very important comments. I would like to thank you, Madame Félicité, for your thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you so much for your presence here and your insights. I'm looking forward to seeing all these investments that we've just said that are coming to fruition this year, the next 10 years, and looking forward to really also the changes that I hope that will be made based on having discussions like this. Brenna, thank you as always for sharing your insights. Charles?
Pleasure's mine.
Asante sana. To our viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. To our partners, I'd like to thank our partners who keep it made in Rwanda, keep it local. I'd like to thank Uzi Collections, Sonia Mugabo, as well as Bourbon Coffee. Thank you very much. Have a good night. See you again next week.